Valerie.
So hello and welcome to another segment of Intersections Policy, Program, and Practice Exchange. My name is Elisa Gwilliam, and I have the pleasure today to be talking to Executive Director of MHA Dutchess, Andrew O'Grady, Professor of Psychology, Director of Center of Aging and Disability Policy at Mount St. Mary College, and co-founder of NOAR, Dr. Larry Force. So Dr. Force, why don't you tell me how we arrived here at part 2?
What a great question. How did we arrive here? We arrived here out of observation. Myself and a couple of my friends and colleagues noticed that there was an absence of treatment, appropriate treatment for adults in the area of addiction and recovery. And from that, we started the conversation. And from that, we created what's called the National Organization of Adult Addiction and Recovery, which is a national organization providing services, training, and care for older adults. We wouldn't have been at this table if it hadn't been for Joan Kaplan and the Kaplan Family Foundation, who supported the entry into this world for us. We're moving along. It's based upon a theory that I created 12, 13 years ago, theory of dimensionality. It's based upon a here and now approach, based upon the fact of not just looking ahead, but looking in the width direction, seeing what's going on in your life, realizing those issues are permeable. Things change. And it's not about what happened in the past, it's what happens now and in the future. And one of the paradigms of the theory of dimensionality and then the practice orientation called dimensional solution-based treatment is it's not a question of grow up, it's a question of grow in and grow out. Recovery is an inside job. And the fact is it starts with, by the time people are knocking on your door telling you that you have a problem, there's nobody that's been there first besides you knocking on your own door saying you have a problem. But now the question is, how do you solve it? Because it is solvable, it is doable. And that's the thing that I think that I'm so happy about, because then we started the conversation with Andrew O'Grady and Mental Health of Dutchess County, Mental Health Association. Because the theory is great. The theory grounds our intervention, but you need a practice orientation. And from that practice orientation, which is really based upon wellness and health, I send, the only way in my private practice, I'll only see people under 2 conditions: that they're doing some type of exercise and working with some type of nutrition. And then I ran into you, Alyssa, and the Hudson Valley Healing Center. And I send more people there now because of the fact that I always tell my clients the best psychologist or therapist you can find is one you forget, meaning that you get back into the rhythm of your own life. So we started discussion with Andrew, and he steps up with his agency and with support. And the next thing you know, we're implementing our Intersections program in his system. He's been a great ally and a great friend, and I would tell you that privately as well as tell you that publicly. So now here we are. We want to be able to elevate the discussion, the dialogue, not only locally, statewide, but nationally. Here we are in COVID. We have a lot of information. We have a lot of skill sets, but we're not in a position to assemble people. And the fact is, technology is our friend. As I tell my students, there's 2 things you bring into a family's life: your heart and technology. If you can only bring one, you bring your heart. But you can't act as and evidence of that we're engaging with you right now, and you'll be engaging with us. So that's how we got here. But let's get practical. The practical part is we're in a COVID-19 world, and we're coming up into a summertime, which talks about celebration. And the reality is that is there ability to celebrate without engaging in behavior that's going to take you down a road that you don't want to go? Andrew and I have been in this field a long time, and we've seen people on the other end of saying, golly gee, I wish I hadn't done that. And the fact is, we're here to tell you that you don't have to get to that point. We know that relapse is very much a part of a recovery process, but it doesn't mean you have to relapse in order to get through the recovery process. So with that, I'd like to turn this over now to Andrew to really talk about, from your perspective. I mean, you sit there, as an executive director, you sit there, you know, with caseworkers, you're involved in the community, you're respected in the community. When people think about who to go to, and I kid you not, you're on the top of the list. So from your perspective, what would you say at this point? I mean, because you're seeing, well, I guess a direct question is, are you seeing a difference in the cases that you're now dealing with? Are you seeing an elevation? Are you seeing, how is it being addressed, you know, in this COVID-19, you know, experience and world?
Well, I may have mentioned it in our last session, but I'm receiving many more phone calls privately, not in a private practice setting, but just calling me and asking my opinion and my knowledge base in helping people that I know and their family members with addiction or depression, anxiety. A lot of these calls have been about younger people, but many times a lot of the older people are isolated. And we talked about this last time about isolation and how that feeds into the addiction piece. And people want to get rid of that feeling of isolation, so they turn to their friend, and their friend may be alcohol or drugs. You know, it's interesting. I was writing down the pros and cons of the summertime and the times around holidays, and how that can be helpful or harmful in an addiction world. And the pros are that we can be outside a lot more. It's not cold. It doesn't get dark at 5 o'clock. You can be outside. You can be exercising. You can be walking around. You can be in the sunshine. All of these things are positive. You could do things around the house outside. These are positive things that help you work with your sobriety. The negatives are that there's a lot of social drinking, a lot of social activities, as Dr. Force mentioned. And that's where people struggle, because they go to these activities and they hope that they go and they don't drink, but many people feel like they just have to have a drink in their hand immediately upon starting a social activity. And when you're new in recovery, or you're not even in recovery yet, but you wish every day you wake up and you say, I'm not going to drink today. And by 1 o'clock you're drinking. Kind of like what I do with food. I'm not going to eat anything bad, and by 8 o'clock I'm at McDonald's having, something I shouldn't have. So this happens with alcohol and drugs. So the social activities, you don't want to isolate yourself from them. You want to be part of them, but you want to feel comfortable not drinking when you're there. I like this. The reason MHA got in on board with this Intersections program is because it's a positive, strength-based, solution-focused intervention that looks to the future and doesn't punish you. And when I say punish you, if you talk to anybody about me and all my meetings that I go to on the state level and the county level, I'm one guy that doesn't hold back, and I say what's wrong in our system of care, and there's a lot wrong in our system of care. In the mental health system of care, last meeting we talked about silos. There's the mental health silo and there's an addiction silo. In the mental health system of care, we use words, and we do it in the addiction system of care as well. We use words like they're non-compliant. So what happens if you're non-compliant and you're going to a public mental health intervention system? Your case is closed, you get sanctioned. If you're going to a mental health treatment center and you don't show up to 2 appointments, you are non-compliant and your case is closed. And as any of you may know, if you go to this system of care, the public mental health system, it's not easy to get into. If you're on medication and you need to call and get into the system to get a new prescription, you have to call, you have to get an appointment maybe 3 weeks away. You get in, you see a therapist, and then they get you an appointment with a psychiatrist, and that's another 3 weeks or a month away. So now you're 8 weeks in and you have to start over with your medication, all because you missed 2 appointments. Now, if I have a sore throat and I don't go to my medical doctor for 2 years, shame on me. Everybody should go every single year for their primary care doctor for a physical. Let's say I don't go for 2 years and I have this terrible sore throat. I pick up the phone, I call my doctor, and they say, come right on in. I go in, they see me, they have my chart. We don't do that in the system of care that we have. We have this system where you have to be fully engaged or not engaged at all, which is not very good. I'll tell you a story. And in the OASAS system of care, in the substance abuse system of care, the public system, we've typically had a very punitive way of addressing addiction. You have all these rules. If you don't follow them, you're in trouble. This, that, and the other thing. My first interview I ever went to was a rehab center in Rhinebeck. I won't use the name. I went there for the interview. I'll never forget it. I chose not to work in the addiction field for 10 years after this because I was shocked. I went in and I had the interview, and the interviewer said, "Why don't, this is a great spot. Why don't you come with us? I'll let you see what it's like to give a haircut." I said, "I don't even know somebody's getting a haircut." I don't know. So I go in this room, and they got this resident, this patient, sitting in a chair, and apparently he had stinking thinking, and he had thoughts of wanting to pick up and use, or maybe he lied to the staff. I don't know what happened. But this haircut was a berating of this gentleman, like in his face, like Marine Corps in his face. "You're worthless, you're this, you're that." That was some type of intervention that was supposed to help people recover. And I was shocked. It kept me away from the addiction field for quite some time, because I was just, I felt like we needed to embrace people, look at their strengths, give them positive feedback, be there for them when they need something, but focus on the positive and focus on goals. And so when Larry presented this Intersections program, I thought this is a potential breakthrough, a bombshell nationwide. This could be a new intervention that people use for the older population, and it's all positive. It's interjecting things in your life to replace the negative things. So interjecting positive nutrition, exercise, mindfulness-based stress reduction, yoga, all these aspects that are very positive, putting them in the person's life and replacing all the negativity. And I just think, I know there's a place for this. I know this is going to be a big success. So I'm really thankful that MHA Dutchess is a part of this process, and that we're going to help move this forward.
And we're glad, you've heard me say this, we're really glad that, we are collaborating on this, because we have a theory and application, and you have a setting. So it's a perfect, blend. When you were talking, a couple of things came to mind. One of the things I tell my students is, when you go into a case review, you're actually walking in with two entities, you and the agency you're representing. Because of the fact you're always representing an agency if you're working for an agency. So there are things that you cannot say, even though you may feel them. So on a number of occasions, working with families, when I worked inside the state institution, some families would come in and tell us how we could do a better job. Well, if we can't meet that, mark, because we don't think we can, why don't you think about taking your person home? That's what you really wanted to say, but you couldn't say that. So then you would engage with the family and try to figure out some type of resolution. But one person asked me, a family asked me one time, if I would come down to Rockland Psychiatric Center. Their son was home for a leave. He did something that was very bizarre at home. They called mental health, and community-based mental health came out, retrieved him, and took him down the Rockland Psychiatric Center. Would I come down to a case review and act as a family advocate? I said, sure. So now I wasn't representing an agency. I could say what I really felt. So we go into this room, and here are the parents. The parents are crying. They want to get their son out of the back locked unit. And here was a social worker that was sitting at the head of the table. And she said, well, we appreciate what you want to do. And she was a woman that was not really in great shape. She herself, had even talked about at the beginning of the meeting about that she was interested in looking at strategies for weight reduction and everything like that. So we sit at the meeting, and the parents, present their case that they want to take their son home. And she sits there at the head of the table, and she says, well, I don't really see that happening until he at least drops 10 pounds and cleans his room for 30 days. Now, I'm not representing an agency, so I can say whatever I really feel. And I said, excuse me, but I think there's a number of people in this room at this table that would be interested in dropping 10 pounds within 30 days. Because the reality is that the system asks our clients sometimes to do things that we don't do ourselves. That punitive thing, that idea of haircutting. If that was to happen today, the next scenario that you would talk about is when the attorneys arrived, because those types of things are intolerable today. But at one point, they were a form of treatment. And I think that the thing that, that you emphasized here that we're so proud of is the fact that I had a neighbor one time up in Massachusetts, and he said to me, you know the guy across the street? And I'll call him James, even though that wasn't his name. Well, it was obvious James was having a problem with alcohol, by his behavior, by his appearance, by the way he would present himself in the neighborhood. And this fellow said to me, you know the problem with James? And I said, what's that? And he said, he doesn't know how to entertain himself. And I remembered that because of the fact that his engagement on a daily activity was with alcohol and drugs. He really didn't know how to engage in a productive way.
His only friend.
His only friend. His only friend. And the fact is, I think that the one thing that we can be very proud of is that with this Intersections program, and the formal name of the program is Intersections, a Day Program Without Walls. Meaning that you can take this with you. You can internalize it. This is a new way of entertaining yourselves, but in a productive way. One of the things that we talk about with addictions, where does it start? Well, it starts with a thought. It could start with a craving, start with an urge. And then all of a sudden you're into action. And I think the thing that we're bringing to the table is new activities, new ways of doing business. There's nobody that talks to us more than we talk to ourselves. And typically we say things to ourselves that we would never allow anybody to say to us. And one of the things with Intersections, with the modules, is a new way of starting a conversation, not only with others, but a new way initially to start a new conversation with yourself. I tell people when they come into my private practice, I'm not your hero. I can't fix you because you're not broken, because we all have stuff. Every one of us has stuff. And the fact is, recovery is a process. And recovery and wellness, they are like cousins. You feel better about yourself, you feel better about others. Typically, what I find is that when people are so angry and bitter in every area of their life, the core of it is their anger and bitterness towards themselves. And if you can figure out a new way to, engage yourself, new way to entertain yourself, then I think, you have a good chance of and the other thing we know is that families get better slower. So we encourage people to do these activities. They start to feel better. Families, it'll take a little bit of time. We know that, but they do come around. Okay. And the fact is that when you start to see differences in yourself, then people will start to see differences in you as well.
And depending on how long the person has been, struggling with this issue that they have, they may have burnt a lot of bridges in their family. I like that you said that the families will come around at some point, because I think people, they give up on that, and then they just feel like they have nothing, because loneliness is a huge problem for people. It drives a lot of negative behaviors, and they don't have a lot of family members because they've made a lot of mistakes, but they can certainly, it's never too late, like you said, to turn it around, and family will come around if you can change and right the ship of your own.
And it really starts with, it doesn't take 8 years of long-term psychotherapy to figure out how to change.
Right.
It can change in a change of a thought. And one of the theorists that really has influenced me in my writing is Albert Ellis, rational emotive therapy. I met him personally. We had him at the college as a speaker. He had an institute. He's now deceased. But he was like in your face type of psychotherapist. So here comes a patient that comes in and client and wants to stop drinking. Ellis would be, then stop. Okay, then stop. Okay, it's kind of like that New York style in your face psychotherapy. Stop. You want to stop it? Then act like you want to stop it. And I think that's the thing. But now the question is, okay, so now you want to stop it. Now you want to act like you want to stop it. how do you go about supporting that? And here comes, our collaborative effort with Intersections, and the purpose of this exchange is to be able to evolve and give voice to this on a local, statewide, and national level. Because the one thing that is absolutely true is the way that services were delivered has changed. Alyssa, I don't know if you have that picture.
Yeah, let me show.
So here is a picture that was taken probably about 3 weeks ago. And
about half that size now.
Yeah, it's come down even further than that.
Pretty amazing.
Yeah. So that's a picture of the main building at Hudson River Psychiatric Center. So I'm driving down Route 9, and all of a sudden this thing catches my eye. And I turn around and I take the picture. And then I put the tagline, mental health at its best, the tearing down of walls. Because there was a time that was the epicenter of treatment. And as I said in the last vignette that we did, my brother called me one day and said, could I help him get a friend of his brother into Hudson River Psychiatric? I said, no. My goal is to help people get out of Hudson River Psychiatric. But the thing that really took me about that picture is look at those doors. Every one of those doors had a story behind it. And it wasn't built. I have a friend that has a belief that the psychiatric centers were built with more of a punitive nature than the developmental centers. The developmental centers started off as schools and training schools and then evolved into institutional settings. But whether it be a developmental center or a psychiatric center or a prison, Dutchess County, the Hudson Valley is chock full of those institutions. And the reason is because when they were built, the current thinking of the day was to hide them from the urban centers. So there wasn't this infrastructure that made travel between here and the city, metropolitan area, so easy. So they were hidden up here. And as I mentioned last time, they started off being underneath the guise of MDs with director homes and director golf courses and director staff. And then as time moved on, and we got into the 70s and started to do the deinstitutionalization, just before that was that most of these places were run by MBAs because of the economy, the economics of it. I have a friend that's writing a paper right now, an essay. He was a director of a large state facility for people with developmental disabilities. And he was a champion of getting people out of institutions into the community, only to find out in reflection that what happened in that scenario is they tried to build community residents, but they built silos. They built these little mini institutions out in the community with everybody having their own budget, their own executive director, their own board. And the fact is, he has a name for it. He's blended the word, community with deinstitutionalization, with institutionalization. And one of the things that he argues about is the fact that, we built these venues in the community, but they were based upon archaic thinking that kept people in institutions. And how many times, and Andrew, you probably have witnessed this multiple times. Yeah, but not in my backyard. We want to keep people, in the community, but don't put them in my backyard. And I'm sure that has been a regular dialogue with your agency when people find out that you're developing some type of residential opportunities for your clients.
Our main building in Mansion Street in Poughkeepsie is really just an administrative building. We're not a mental health clinic. We're not a program here, but the fight when we wanted to buy this building by the city council and by neighbors, just because the word mental is in the title of our organization, it was a rough fight. It's an interesting story. The only reason we actually got approval was because one of the county legislators, one of the city council people made a terrible error, and it showed their lack of knowledge, which was good. They sent a scathing letter to the Poughkeepsie Journal saying that, they don't need people coming into this area, urinating on the buildings. I mean, her characterization of what somebody with a mental health diagnosis was so damning that all of a sudden no one could get on board with her. even though they all agreed with her because her letter was so horrible that no one could get on board with her, and it passed. And thankfully, all our neighbors love this organization. We're doing so much for the community. Now, we're not a residential setting, but just the word mental. So in my backyard, that happens all the time, and that's why we've seen the closing down. You know, these centers closed down, and then they did have community residences, and they had a lot of supported housing, and they had a huge case management presence dealing with the people coming out of the institutions. But I have to tell you that in the last 10 years, the community residences have closed down. The case management has been watered down. The caseloads are way too high. The reimbursement's way too low. So, you know, we're missing something. It feels like it's all or nothing in this state or in this country, where you have this, which is too much, the picture. The institutions were way too much. It wasn't necessary. People could live outside of that environment with the right supports. That's why intersections, and let me just say that for those of you who are stuck in the mindset of the silos, you're probably saying, is this about addiction or is this about mental health? But I'm telling you that it's about both, and it always is about both. And that's why we shouldn't have the silos. So when you hear us bouncing off of mental health to addiction, these are issues that people need help with, bottom line. And that's why having a new approach is so important, because we've been doing the same stuff for so long. And you know, I think we need a change. Any politician, and we're going to have politicians on this show going forward, on this podcast going forward, to talk about what they see in their communities. But that's why we need new and exciting innovations like intersections, because we have to do something a bit different.
And I think, and building upon that, this is not the program that we have. We call it a program. Do we call it an intervention? Do we call it a style of living? It's not silo driven, and it's not stigma based. And we know that this works. And how do we know that this works? Because of the fact that the people that have experienced it have been hugging us on the way out, have been talking about it later on. And our goal is to be able to plant seeds with this. You know, it's based upon health and wellness, nutrition, movement, you know, all positive things, without this idea of diagnosis, without, you know, as I mentioned, I worked in the state institutions for years. In my private practice, when I first came, you know, into a private practice, I was taking insurance. And I moved away from the insurance world because everything had to be diagnosis. And what I practice now is more of a solution-focused based treatment. And I have to give credit to Joel Simon. Joel Simon, I met him. He was a social worker at hospice. He's a prolific writer. Matter of fact, I use one of his textbooks in my case management class about social casework, you know, solution-based casework. And their underlying principles or overarching principles, or both, is that it's not about diagnosis. If it's not broken, don't try to fix it. And I loved it was like a breath of fresh air when I was exposed to this treatment paradigm. And the other thing that they talk about is the miracle. You know, tonight you go to sleep, tomorrow you wake up, and the miracle happens. And the life that you've always wanted to live, you're now living. What's that look like? How do you feel? And how do you act differently? I love that approach, because we're all capable of change. You know, we have multiple selves across our lifespan. It's not like we don't know, you know, one of my other favorite theorists is Harry Stack Sullivan. And in his paradigm, it was the good me, the bad me, and the not me. That was his thinking about personality. We have good parts, we have bad parts, but the psychotic separate part, the not me, I mean, there are things that we've all done in our lives that we're very happy about. There are things we've all done in our lives that, we're not that happy about. But we're not at the point where we're saying, oh, that wasn't me. That was me, but that's not the me today. And the reason is because of the fact that I've grown in a productive, healthy way. So that's what we're really hoping that people walk away with. The other emphasis is you're not alone. You don't have to do this alone. You know, and with technology, we can connect with you anywhere at any time. And it's not, again, I keep saying this because I love the words that Andrew used. It's not silo driven. So that's the story, I think, for our story for today. As Andrew said, as we move on, now we bring in a guest, a celebrated guest, both the legislative from a policy perspective, senators from a policy perspective, program developers, okay, and practitioners. Because what we want to do is we want to use this platform to elevate this to a national discussion about the reinvention of support and help for people that are looking to move forward on the recovery path.
We'd like to get some people in here also that maybe are struggling a little bit. Maybe they were in recovery and they relapsed. Some real true stories from real people that you'll see and you'll hear from. And I'm hoping people are enjoying these podcasts, and that I think it can be very beneficial.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Well, listen, thank you.
Well, thank both of you. And thank you for joining us today. You've been listening to Intersections Policy, Program, and Practice Exchange. If you want to hear this program again, share it with friends, or even comment on it, you can do so by logging on to our website, www.intersections-exchange.com, Digital Resource Center. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And while you're on our website, make sure you sign up for our newsletter. The website again is www.intersections-exchange.com. We hope you join you next week as we continue our conversation. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.